A very good evening from wherever you're watching NTV. A very warm welcome to On the Spot. Now, the Entebbe Chief Magistrate's Court sentenced a 24-year-old TikToker to 6 years imprisonment for abusing the first family. Edward Aheba, a self-employed resident of Nsamvu, Nama Sub-County in Mukono District, was last Friday convicted upon his own plea of guilty on 3 charges of hate speech and 1 charge of misleading or malicious information. Today, on the spot, we are asking, are laws on misuse of social media and hate speech being abused? That is going to be the debate. Many thanks for joining us. Hello again and welcome to On the Spot. I'm Chris Higenyi. I'm joined on set by 3 very brilliant minds, lawyers and an advocate. On my immediate left, I have Maria Lakel Gaba. She is a Communications and Advocacy Officer at the Center for Freedom of Information Center. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
On her left, I have Aaron Chiza, a lawyer. Many thanks for joining us.
It's always a deep delight to be in the presence of this audience.
Thank you very much. We are honored always. And on my extreme left, Marion Chirabo, a lawyer. Many thanks for making it too.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, gentlemen and ladies, what we have with us today is the question. The laws on misuse of social media and hate speech being abused. Of course, this is on account of the very latest developments that we see in the country. As I stated in the preamble to the program, a 24-year-old TikToker getting 6 years in jail for abusing the first family. And of course, if I may, there's a quote that was carried by the Daily Monitor, that is today's Daily Monitor, and according to the judge, the accused pleaded for mercy, but he did not look remorseful at all for his acts. He's a person who was aware of what he was doing, and court had an opportunity to see the video. The language that was being used was really vulgar. The court was of the opinion that the accused deserved a punishment which will enable him learn from his past so that next time he will respect the person of the president, the first lady, and the first son. This is a significant development and a ruling that, of course, does lay the ground for any other incident that may occur in the near future. If I may ask for your opinion, how you received news of a 24-year-old TikToker receiving 6 years in jail for abusing and using language that degrades and demeans the president and the first family. Marion.
Well, it was so unfortunate. I think it was a shock to many people, especially on the backdrop that a similar offense was recently in that same act, offensive communications under Section 25 of the same act that has similar provisions and similar implications. I think also it goes to show you really, I would say, the kind of state that we are dealing with. Because if the court, it's just a replica of the different laws that we have been facing, especially when it comes to freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought. This isn't the first time we've seen laws like this. I want to take you far back as the Public Management Order Act and how that was brought in to kind of curtail the freedom of assembly of many people. And really, the state put in place that law to kind of curtail the protests that were going on. And even when the court struck down several provisions of that law, the state, or struck the police, went ahead and continuously used these provisions or this same act to continuously curtail people's freedom of expression, as freedom of assembly. Now, for this one, as I said previously, Section 25 of this same act, the Computer Misuse Act, had similar provisions. What is offensive language? And the court was like, it is too vague for us to quantify what offensive language is. If we go back to hate speech, in the definition of what it is in this act, ridiculing someone, degrading someone, you know, what you see as ridicule might not be the same thing that I see as ridicule.
Okay. You
know, I might say that you're a man with a great beard, and you are offended by that, and to you I have ridiculed you.
All right.
So what is the scope? So constitutionally, it's unconstitutional. It's unfortunate that the magistrate thought that it was proper to actually convict him under provision that was clearly unconstitutional. So it's really unfortunate that the courts could actually legitimize such an uncouth and unconstitutional provision, I would say.
Interesting submission there. Aaron Kiza.
Yeah, it's an annoying development. The sentencing itself is more offensive than the conduct it seems to stem it, to try to stop, because a magistrate is supposed to know that abusing the president is part of democracy. If we can't abuse the president, then for crying out loud, he's not even a president. You're not fit to be a president if you cannot stomach abuse. If the first family doesn't want to be abused, offended, ridiculed, demeaned, for crying out, they have to resign and leave State House and go and start rearing cows. So part and parcel of being a president, being a leader, is having a thick skin. You are not a leader if you cannot stomach abuse, period, even on a logical basis. But even constitutionally speaking, this is unpalatable, very problematic. It cannot stand even an hour in a constitutional court, this kind of offense. Because this is an offense conceived by the Speaker of Parliament, channeled through Muhammad Nsereko, and by extension Dan Chimosho. It is a movie of 3 guys in the Parliament to just silence criticism. So initially, only some people in the State House were untouchable, but now even the Parliament is untouchable. And this is an Antamwang project. This law, you see, it's around like 7 clauses. She just doesn't want people to write about her, doesn't want people to differ with her. And this, I am saying, is even on the Hansard of Parliament. If you read it, she was very clear. She doesn't want people to write about them. So they are using the space of Parliament to settle, to shield themselves illegally and constitutionally from public scrutiny. It's very absurd that, because when you see the magistrate's words as they are reported in the media, because we have not seen the charge sheet, but if you see the reasons for sentencing, they are all wrong as you read them. You cannot use criminal law to ensure that people start respecting the president. No, that's not the purpose of criminal law. You cannot say that the man looks unrepentant. Clearly, courts are not like, are you becoming a psychologist? What kind of, how does someone who looks unrepentant look like? I think for me, everything was wrong. From the charge sheet, it's wrong. The very idea of having a criminal prosecution on this thing was wrong. It shouldn't have been there. And the law itself is unconstitutional. There are 1,000 things which are wrong with this thing. We can talk about it until the cows come back home. Those ones which haven't come
No
back
doubt.
home.
We have sufficient time on the spot this evening to be able to thresh out just about everything. But before I come to Maria Lakel on what came to her mind, especially after this ruling was hammered down, being remorseful for any one person that finds themselves in the dock I don't know how being remorseful or not being remorseful is measured if somebody has not explicitly stated whether they are sorry and that they feel like they are going to do better if they are not sentenced harshly. You speak about being repentant and who looks like is repentant and who doesn't look like. At what point should the judge use that ability to figure out somebody's temperament or how they present themselves in the dock to decide whether they deserve justice or not?
It is that specific area is malleable and very fluid, and the further way you steer clear from it, the better as a judge, because you need to, the Constitution requires a reasoned judgment. So if you're going to reason on looks, it's very problematic. If you're going to say someone is not remorseful, then you have to base it not on looks but on conduct. Okay. Is there anything he has done that shows that he's not remorseful? Because the only thing we know that he did was plead for mercy. People who plead for mercy clearly are remorseful. Yeah, you need to show there is something he did. Was there something he did that he was contemptuous in court? Clearly you would have to give him the benefit of doubt. But it's not an area that is where judges and lawyers are strongest, really. Our area is law, is constitutional paradigms, and this should not, the very idea that the guy was charged shows you how we misuse power in Uganda. It is abuse of authority, the very existence of the law, the very idea that he was charged, because the effect of this is stifling freedom of expression, is silencing criticism, is sending chills down our spines as pundits, as commentators, as journalists, as lawyers, as activists, as all sorts of people who discuss these things. I watched the video. It was annoying. But just because I am annoyed with you does not mean that you go to the zero maximum prison or whatever, you even be remanded. No, criminal law is punitive. You're not supposed to be punished like that. If President Museveni is annoyed or whoever else is a first son, first cousin, first whatever, they can seek remedies in court under civil law. This thing can be remedied. If you think the man is running amok, you can hold a prayer breakfast meeting or overnight and pray and ensure there is anointing oil and all this poured on him so that he becomes a better person. If it needs counseling, elders exist for that kind of thing. The courts do not substitute social institutions for engendering moral values. No. We are supposed to deal with more serious stuff and not people who are annoying each other. You know, if you walk through a market, you know what things are going to be through.
A lot of things will be said.
The borders, just saying that Olinga Matako, which is
restrained from using language that is extreme.
Yes.
All right, Maria, from the point of view of the Freedom of Information Center, I know you must have been taken aback by the ruling. What does it mean now in your advocacy agenda?
Yeah, first of all, I must say, like my colleagues said, it's very, very unfortunate. Personally, when I saw the ruling, I went back to the video just to be sure of, you know, what this young guy was doing. And looking at the video, what came into my mind was, you know, the face of a frustrated youth in Uganda, hungry, angry, and just expressing anger of what is going on at a leader. And, you know, the court coming up and making a ruling and sentencing him to 6 years simply because he was angry about something. I think they missed the point. The point was he is angry about something, about the leadership, which I think this guy, this gentleman represents very many other Ugandans that are unhappy about very many things. And so I thought as good leadership, because the law, among the things the law is supposed to do is to promote good governance. And part of good governance is giving, you know, the citizens the freedom to express themselves about how they feel the decisions that the government is making, about what is going on in their country. I think in terms of advocacy, in terms of human rights, this was a violation of human rights. given that the Constitution of Uganda provides in Article 29 freedom of expression. So I feel it was unconstitutional, and looking ahead, it's dark times that we are heading for if such rulings are actually being made.
Of course, Mr. Chiza spoke about the fact that every person now, including journalists, will be looking out for exactly how and the what of what you say at any one point in time. But allow me go back to Marion. You were about to take us through the nature or the real description of hate speech and freedom of expression as a concept on its own. I imagine that it's elastic, and within that scope, somebody must be able to know that if I can use my rights this way, there must be a point at which my own conscience tells me I should not go overboard. Now, Aaron Kiza might say, why should you determine at what point I go overboard or not? But as a person who understands the sentiments of any one other person in society, you should be able to also figure that out and perhaps say, let me not say this in this tone at this particular moment in time.
Well, I think before we go to the threshold on what the limitations on the freedom of expression and speech are, I think we should look at the reason why the law itself exists and why nations all over the world have decided to protect it under their constitutions.
That's right.
It is to say that in a democratic society, there are certain things we should value. And those things should be the ability for us to discuss certain issues, but also advocacy. You get, when you look at most courts around the world, whether it's India, whether it's America, or democracies that we aspire to, and even our own laws, our constitutional courts, when they talk about the fact that, so what values do we have to look at in a democratic society? They mention the fact that it is important for people in a democratic society to express themselves, that you cannot use fear, because what you're doing, essentially you're threatening someone that if you say something offensive to me or something that I find offensive, and like I've said before, something that you find offensive might not be something that I find offensive. It's just the way I'm expressing myself.
Sometimes I might be better at handling offense than any other person.
Tolerance, So you might find it offensive, I don't find it offensive, but in our democracy we should be able to discuss and have those conversations, and in those conversations you must be able to tolerate. Once you use fear to silence me, it breeds resentment. Once it breeds resentment, it breeds hatred. And once I hate you, that is when violence starts. So you cannot have a stable democratic government when the people hate you, when the people cannot express, when they're asking you things about accountability, somehow that sounds offensive to you. There is no way that a democracy can thrive under such conditions. So the courts are very skeptical when it comes to such such provisions, because they want to maintain that kind of environment where we can discuss. Now the circumstances under which courts have decided that perhaps they can put a limit are, one, cases like defamation, but also you see that that is in civil circumstances. You don't necessarily put someone behind bars because of that, right? Cases whereby it's perhaps in public interest or order, and they have found that maybe your offensive communication was to incite, you were inciting an offense to happen. But even then, court is quite skeptical and so careful in deciding what amounts to that incitement. You cannot say, for example, you cannot say that, let me say, not paying your taxes is an offense, and then someone goes on social media and says, this government is taxing us highly and is eating our money, and therefore I'm saying we should stop paying taxes altogether. The court will look at how possible is it that, or how immediate is that incitement. Are you getting me? It can't be hypothetical because you assumed, as the state, you assumed that this particular statement is going to incite these people to commit an offense. It has to be an immediate. There has to be an immediate causation to that incitement. So you see that courts really shy away from trying to limit this right as much as possible. So there are circumstances, but rarely will court side with the state and say that, you know, let us limit and curtail. And especially for this particular section 26, as amended, this one on hate speech, I really don't see courts, at least when they take it to the Constitutional Court, I don't see the Constitutional Court siding with the state.
All right.
But I would also say, whereas we are concentrating on the hate speech, there are other offenses in this amendment that are quite problematic. And I think that even when people are looking at this, this boy being put behind bars, there are other crimes to come, like unsolicited information, really.
That's right. Yeah. We shall come to that a little bit later. But let me ask Aaron Chiza, what is the possibility right now for the 24-year-old TikToker to appeal? Has there been any attempt to, or is there the leverage, the leeway for him to be able to seek an appeal of this?
Yeah, the possibility is there, and I hope he takes it. I am sure that there are people who are going to help, and it's possible to appeal this, and while the appeal is going on, the court can even give him bail pending appeal, so that he gains his liberty. And of course, the law on which his incarceration, his sentencing is premised, is under a serious constitutional challenge by over 30 civil society organizations and members of the public, and we hope the Constitutional Court will handle it in the next session. I don't know when the next session of the Constitutional Court will be. So the appeal process is possible, it's still within time, and there is some hope for him, because I don't know the specifics, but it doesn't look like he was properly advised on his rights, because I don't see how he could have pleaded guilty to this kind of clear and constitutional charge.
All right. Shortly, we'll want your submission or perspective on the selective enforcement of some of these laws. The question that many would want to ask, that if, for example, a top government official were to say words that demean, degrade, and maybe insult an opposition figure, would the same matters be handled the way they've been handled for the 24-year-old? But before you do that, the Freedom of Information Center right now must be scratching it everywhere to find out exactly what's the way forward in handling this particular matter, because it sets a precedence, and either the freedom of expression is going to be curtailed at a higher rate than what many had feared because of the already existing forms of or laws that look at ensuring that people don't say what they want to say at any one point in time. If you don't mind, take us through what the next step is on the part of advocates like the Freedom of Information Center.
Of course, before we even get to this case of the 24-year-old, the Misuse Act itself inherently is a problem. It's unconstitutional. It's contrary to Article 29 of the Constitution. When you look at the different sections, literally, they are all contradicting with the Constitution. Therefore, our advocacy would be that if the government could completely halt the entire the Misuse Act, or if not, look into the different sections before we have submitted analysis. Actually, before it was even made the law, before they adopted it, we reviewed it, we submitted to the government, but still this section, the very sections that you know we found problematic, were still passed in the very law. So we'd be looking at if government could actually call off the entire law, because it's again it contradicts the Constitution and it contradicts all the other international laws on freedom of expression. And in this specific case, what we see is that, you know, people have already been intimidated enough by the cases of Stella Nyanzi, Kakweza, and all other people. And now with this in place, we are thinking that already, you know, shrinking civic space is going to disappear. We are going to get to a point where we even fear to come here on NTV to say a thing about the law, because you do not know what you should say and what you should not say. So as civil society, we are looking at how can we make the government actually understand that it's very, very important for a democratic state to be in touch with its citizens. The civic space needs to be protected. If the citizens are showing interest in using social media to air out what is disturbing them, to, you know, to engage in civic space, then it should be protected for sure. If this is the space where, you know, government can actually get to understand what is going on in the lives of people, what they are thinking about the decisions they are making. It's the platform that is actually the government can, you know, can use in their advantage to understand, you know, what they should be doing with their people to, you know, to build trust with their citizens, because they are meant to serve the people. So on the side of civil society, I think one of the tasks that, you know, in terms of advocacy is to make the government to understand that actually the citizen trust is so important in governance.
What is the how of that? Are you going to embark on a petition right away? Or you're going to continue to pray to the government?
Not to pray to the government. Right now it's not yet, we are not yet clear on the exact...
You're still studying the environment, and understand exactly how to go about it.
Yeah.
All right, let me return to Aaron Chiza. Selective enforcement. We, over the last 20 years, I'm sure, you've had public officials, including government ministers, speak and say words that may demean, degrade any other one person. I do not know whether any one of them could find himself, if he repeated those words right now, the same kind of treatment or considerations that were given the 24-year-old would apply to any government official who uses language that demeans another person or demeans Ugandans for that matter.
I mean, you know who calls them fools, who calls them lazy, who calls opposition pigs. Have you seen him being touched? Of course, you'll not be touched. And of course, he has that constitutional protection. But even his ministers, even his ministers repeat these things. They don't have the legal immunity, and they are not going to be touched. His RDCs, you know, there is someone recently appointed deputy RDC who even did the unspeakable against the Kavaka and Uganda Kingdom, an entire tribe. So it is an uncouth, embarrassing, selective application of the law, and even more problematic than the application of this law is that the nature of the law itself invites, seduces abuse. It's a slate for abusing people because it is so ambiguous. Anyone, anytime, for saying literally anything that is disagreeable or critical to the regime can find themselves afoul of this law. You only need to disagree with the powers that be, and of course you only need to be weak as the gentleman to be behind the bars and eventually to be forced to plead guilty, because I am sure if this man had enough legal firepower, this is a charge he was going to see off even on matter of simple evidence and so on and so forth. The only reason he's going to suffer 6 years if something dramatic is not going to be done is because he's poor. He's vulnerable. He's part of the margins, the fringes of society. And unfortunately, these abusive laws, they affect the most vulnerable, the weakest members of our society. Even a big shot journalist like you can never find can never be a victim of this kind of prostitution. You are not going to plead guilty to this kind of nonsensical law. You are going to have a serious lawyer defending you, and you are going to know what to do, which applications, whether to challenge it in the Constitutional Court. When, like, there are many legal rights he could have exercised if he was properly represented. I even doubt he was represented.
That is a damning assessment, if you listen to Aaron Chiza's submission there, of the judiciary and the dispensation of justice by the officers, including judges and magistrates. So at this point in time, the integrity of the magistrate is being questioned, not so? And that is a problem itself. So how should the judiciary handle this particular dilemma? Because at the end of the day, if anybody, as Aaron Chiza alludes to, if he had, for example, gotten representation, good representation for that matter, then perhaps the verdict would have been different. Now that it is where it is, there is still a chance for somebody or an activist lawyer to come up and be able to conduct matters leading to an appeal. When that happens and another court decides otherwise, that would again be an indictment of the judiciary itself. How do you see it playing out, Marion?
Well, I think it's not even the magistrate. I think this plays into the reports, but what human rights activists have always said, or the reports of the judiciary has always said, that access to justice in this country is expensive and it's only for the few. We have just heard about him. What about those ones whose stories never appear in the news? You know, recently we saw an eviction. Actually, and this is what, it's not even just about this particular offense of hate speech. Recently we were here when people were evicted off a wetland and petrol stations were there. And NEMA said that for them they had permission, which these poor people did not have. So this goes on and on and on, and really we have to ask ourselves, the way the court system works, it does not work for the majority of Ugandans in this country. It works for a certain few, certain people who have access to resources, maybe some level of education, and therefore they have some level of knowledge about the laws themselves. But even when you have level of knowledge, it all comes back to money and power, and at the end of the day. When it comes to the appeal, I want to believe that it will go the same way that Dr. Stella Nyanzi's case went, whereby when they appealed, the High Court quashed that conviction. For her it was the cyber harassment provision. So I want to believe the courts would use the same reasoning, but also it is still unconstitutional. So we're waiting to see, we're depending on human rights defenders like Mr. Aaron Chiza to see which way they will go with the Constitutional Court. I'm very hopeful that it will be struck down, but it also gives us room to think about the kind of judicial system that we have. How do we make it more accessible to the most vulnerable, which is the majority of this country? How do we make sure that the judicial system works for all Ugandans? Yes.
All right. Before we go for a break, very shortly, I would like to ask a question that is not entirely a legal matter, but something that should be able to help the layman, including myself, understand exactly what the elasticity of hate speech can be, especially when you, for example, begin to suggest that one particular tribe either stands at a better position, especially when it comes to access to social services, or even, for example, jobs within government agencies. When you say that, are you fostering hate speech in a tribalistic way? I don't know whether I make perfect sense there, but it's something that we should be able to, because on a daily basis, there are people who say words and they specifically point to a particular tribe.
Yes.
Now, are we seeing hate speech on a daily basis, but no one is acting on it?
According to the way this particular provision is construed, that's what it wants to construe, that whenever you say perhaps, because it talks about creating division, and I can always come up and say that that in itself is creating some kind of division, some kind of hatred against a certain what? A certain tribe. You see, so we can't even discuss, we can't have discussions about tribalism and nepotism. That is what this law seeks to do. You know, we cannot have discussions of whether Anita Among's office is full of her relatives or the Speaker's chambers is full of her relatives, because then we are going against a certain group of people. We're spreading hate against a certain group. That's how dangerous this law is. So even these exhibitions that people have been doing, parliamentary exhibitions,
that is hate
that is hate speech according to this provision. So yeah, rightly, right. So that is the interpretation.
Okay, quickly, 1 minute.
Talked about
yeah. Yes, they are ridiculed, yes.
Ridiculing the position.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if they say you are a thief, don't you feel you have been ridiculed, and especially depending on how highly you think of yourself?
You are.
All right, Aaron Chiza, Maria and Marion, when you say people are thieves, the Daily Monitor today carried a headline, "My thieves should not get bail," and that was the president. I don't know what's going to happen, especially in light of that particular statement by the president. Let's take a break. On the Spot returns shortly. Welcome back. We're glad you're still with us here on NTV. You are watching On the Spot, and we are discussing and rather asking the question, are laws on misuse of social media and hate speech in Uganda being abused? This comes on the backdrop of the latest development, 2 cases, one of a 24-year-old who has been sentenced to 6 years in jail for degrading and spreading hate speech towards the first family, but also Herbert Brora, the former deputy RCC, who has been accused of spreading malicious information against the Speaker of Parliament, Right Honourable Anita Among. With me on set, I have Maria Leka Gaba. She is the Communications and Advocacy Officer at the Freedom of Information Center, rather, and Aaron Chiza, a lawyer, as well as Marion Chirabo on the very extreme end. Let me begin with Aaron Chiza. The Computer Misuse Amendment Act of 2022 is one that is widely contested by human rights defenders, by lawyers, and now the public is up in arms, especially with regard to the goings-on in courts. Is there any attempt right now that is deliberate and seeks to either achieve a repeal of this particular act or a complete removal from the legislative aspects of our country? Is there an attempt? You must be part of something.
Yeah, so I am aware of 3 constitutional petitions.
Part of 3?
3 constitutional challenges to this law.
To this particular law.
And every provision of this Amendment Act is challenged. At the end of the day, we have faced that the court will throw away the entire law as it is, because there is no aspect of this law that is either necessary, legal, or proportionate. The entire law is an abuse of authority by the Speaker of Parliament, and it should never see the light of day after a court has pronounced itself, which we hope will come soon.
Okay.
So over like 40 civil society organizations are part of these 3 legal challenges to that law, and among them is the Uganda Law Society and several individual journalists, media groups, groups that protect journalistic rights, and other groups that are for civic and political rights. It's one of those laws that have widespread unpopularity, if I may call it notoriety, understandably, because it was a law that someone who doesn't want to be criticized decided to push down the throats of Ugandans through their MPs, and those aspects of the Ugandan public that do not understand the problems associated with this kind of offensive law, ironically, are supposed to stop people from being offended, which is not a constitutional objective of any law, are now seeing for themselves what this law can do, what it is meant for. The poor people are being arrested, detained, sentenced, and also the critics, government critics, are being silenced by this law. It is a law that we have to work together to quickly put, in the words of President Museveni, in the dustbin of history.
Interesting there. Now, before this particular discussion is misconstrued by any person out there to be one that offers leeway and express permission for any Ugandan to say whatever they want at any one time using any platform, which could be social media, of course, Facebook, X, and TikTok. What is the state of affairs right now? When you look at the content generated across board, I'm sure there are times you are taken aback a little by some of the content that we see on TikTok, the content that we see on Facebook, as well as X for that matter. It could be extreme. Isn't there some sort of framework that should be able to align this kind of conduct to allow for people to understand that at a certain point T, there must be decency or order for that matter? Maria Lakel, what do you have to say about that? Because at the end of the day, we might not be able to, for example, ring fence how we get offended. That me, I cannot handle, so do not even attempt to say anything against me. But when you look at what's happening, and this one is something you should look at from the point of, for example, the society out there, could be the parents, could be anybody else who might find themselves listening to information that actually doesn't sound good. I don't know whether that is a point that arrives pretty comfortably.
Yeah, what I can say about that, you see, like my colleague said, what you might find offensive may not be offensive for me. What you find moral upright could actually be immoral to another society. So I think some of the things could be left to you know, like you said, the parents on moral grounds, the parents, we have church leaders, we have the teachers, but using the law to dictate, you see, the law is supposed to, you know, to work for everyone, but then you cannot dictate that, you know, everyone must believe that this is what is morally upright, because we come from different societies, we are raised differently, and because the law is meant to serve everyone, it means you cannot use the law to dictate certain things, you know, like how someone should express themselves. If you have written that everyone has a freedom of expression, that's what the law says, then stick to that. In terms of morality, leave that to, you know, to other aspects of society, like the church or church leaders, like the teachers, like the parents. But in terms of the law, I don't think the law should be used to dictate certain things, like, you know, what should be morally upright to everyone across. Yeah.
Aaron Chiza, in your readings of what happens across the globe and in societies that are much more liberal and where the governments allow people to say and speak out on matters, whatever they want to speak about, in cases where the presidents or public figures have found themselves targeted by people who want to spread malicious information against them. How has this been handled? Is there some sort of precedent that we can look at and say, if, for example, the President of the United States right now finds himself in a spot of bother, people are questioning his ability to govern on account of sometimes losing his train of thought as he's speaking. And this is being aired out by so many people across the social media platforms. We haven't seen any actions taken against whoever says that perhaps the president has one disease or the other, or is grappling with one condition or the other. But before even this particular development that we see Mr. Biden grappling with, has there been anything you can cite and say in France, in Britain, or any other part of the world, there was a case where a president went for a citizen who he thought was overboard?
Not in a democracy. Those are things that happen in dictatorships. If you do that in China, in Russia, in any dictatorship, then the president, the king, the monarch, the military junta is going to go for your throat, for your whatever, for your life even. So how freely ordinary citizens discuss, criticize, ridicule, offend their leader is a reliable thermometer for democracy. If you want to distinguish a democracy from a dictatorship, just look at ordinary citizens, their discourse on radio, on TV, on social media, how free. For example, the difference between us and Kenya has been most graphically illustrated by that lady who is twerking between two soldiers. That is a democracy, and here, can you get close to our soldier?
Talking between two UPDF
officers. Clear, you can't argue that. So in a democracy, not only is it not an offense to ridicule leaders, democracy exists to encourage that criticism to flourish. For example, why would you want to protect people from criticizing Biden's loss of the train of thought? Truth is part of what democracies are trying to seek. So when you stop people from ridiculing others, you are putting cartoonists out of their job. Some professionals depend for their very existence on satire.
On that kind of satire.
Yeah. Comedians, satirists, all of them you're putting out of the job. You are shutting their mouths, you're breaking their pens, you are zipping their lips. If we want journalism that is of first rate, where do we get the best journalism? Think of it. USA, Britain, France. Why? The Paris Review. Like, think of the best media houses. They are in democracies because thoughts and ideas are allowed to flourish. How do they flourish? Through the fire of criticism, crossfire, debate, robust. So, but if you kill it with the law, then you're killing civilization, you're slowing the pace of civilization. People don't realize that by silencing thought and speech, they are also frustrating development, including economic development, including possibility of patents. These things have real GDP implications. These things that they are playing around with in Parliament called laws.
All right, Marion, that should be something you do agree with, but I want us to juxtapose it. If a leader notices that if citizens can speak out on anything, anyhow, then it will show that we are in a democracy, wouldn't that completely flip the ratings and, for example, depict any one country as a democracy, yet it actually isn't a democracy? I'm sure there are sentiments you've heard before that President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni allows Ugandans to talk. There was a time Ugandans weren't allowed to talk. That would pass for democracy, wouldn't it?
Are they allowed to talk?
They've been talking.
Can we? But we're just talking about a boy who's behind bars, you know. So there's certain degrees. What do you mean allowing them to talk when people are being arrested and we have provisions? on our legislation that actually prevents them from talking. But then also, of course, the biggest criticism is about, okay, let me say that the people, the proponents of the Museveni government will say, you know, they always take us back to the times of Amin and what, where people would even be kidnapped and you know,
where there was freedom of expression but no freedom after expression.
Freedom after expression, the infamous saying.
Yeah.
But then I'll also ask, so when we're talking about democracy, what do we aspire to? Should we be thankful that just because things were bad before, and then so our present should not be better? Are you getting me?
I do.
Just because we came out from a time of turbulence, a time of war, does that mean that Ugandans should not aspire for better? Should not aspire to live in a country where they can freely express themselves without this but. Should not aspire for, let me say, a better economy. Should not aspire for leaders who actually go in there and represent people's views. Should not aspire for a budget that works for them. Is that what we're saying?
Absolutely not.
So why do we keep on, yeah, things were there before, so what, should we die? Okay, should we continue stay in our misery just because you apparently you came in your time? You decided that the status quo was not, you were not comfortable with it, that Uganda could be better. You went to the bush, you decided to do what you did. The generation of today aspires that Uganda can be better. They desire for a better Uganda. A Uganda where their leaders can be held accountable, a Uganda where their taxes work for them, a Uganda where they have jobs, a Uganda where the law works for them, the legislation, that parliamentarians sit down and make legislation that works for them. Is that wrong for us to aspire to that? So I don't think that is a valid reason to give that things were worse in the past and therefore we should continue being begging on our knees and being grateful for the little that we have. If the people that are now in government were begging and being grateful for the little that Amin gave them or Bote gave them, they wouldn't be here today. Interesting
there. Let's transition, and of course in a way that doesn't take us off this particular topic. It is RCC, former RCC, I must be very specific, Herbert Burora, Anderson Burora's case, and he's facing charges of hate speech too. But there is a new one, or rather another, which is malicious information spread against the Speaker of Parliament, Right Honourable Anita Among. We saw in the run-up to Mr. Burora's interdiction as RCC, he spoke extensively about what he thought were the wrongs that were going on, and he was very unapologetic in pointing his finger at the Speaker. I don't know whether in pointing the finger at the Speaker there was malice afterthought. Is that something? Of course it's a charge that has been brought forth. The defense contests that, but what do you make of the fact that what he said, and of course most of it was anchored on what we saw in the exhibition, was that malice in your... Somebody would say, why should I even ask such a question? You're going to say it wasn't. But you have the capacity to look at it from all angles so that we can be as objective as possible.
Okay, again, from my point of view, I would, of course, think it wasn't. He was actually doing what he's supposed to do as a citizen. Hold your leaders accountable. Yes, that's what you're supposed to do. He's actually doing what exactly he is supposed to do. On the other hand, I think the Speaker is wrong. Like a leader, you are supposed to have space in your heart, taking this, to look at it objectively. What they are saying, is it true? If it's not true, come out and say what is truth. come out with evidence to disapprove what the person is talking about, but you have not disapproved what they are saying. Instead, you're taking them behind the, behind the bars. I think it's, I don't even know how to call it, but I feel it's beyond, because if you say you're giving me the law and you're giving me permission through the access to information law to, to hold you accountable using the information, the public information that you make available to me, but then I've used the information and you're using the same acts, to put me behind the laws. I don't know what exactly you want me as a citizen to do. So I would say in that RCC's case, it was so unfortunate, because I feel he was doing the right thing, just like all other citizens like me should do. Hold our leaders accountable, ask the hard questions that we don't understand, and it's the responsibility of our leaders to actually come out and give clarity on the things that we are raising.
Aaron Chiza, legal proceedings that saw the arrest and the arraignment before court of the former RCC. I would like you to also widen that to cover the tendency by agencies of government, security agencies, to swoop in after an official, either president, prime minister, vice president, and in this case, the speaker, has expressed discomfort about something. I would, for example, expect the police and the agencies to use the posts that the gentleman put across to be able to have a case on their own without necessarily depicting that they are acting on the directives of either the president or the vice president, and in this case, the speaker. Do you think the police has the capacity to act on its own without necessarily waiting for a directive from a top government official?
It doesn't have that capacity, because that capacity has been systematically, deliberately, and consistently killed. Anita Among is misusing parliamentary police. Police at parliament is not supposed to be doing what it is doing, arresting people in Tinder or whatever. So she's misusing police guards at parliament to do her bidding, to fight her wars, because she doesn't like the speech that the former RCC was giving, and so on and so forth. It's a sheer abuse of power. Secondly, the punishment is in the process. They know that this case is going nowhere. And like, there is even no case really against Borora. But they know that the time he will have spent on remand, the inconvenience is going through. If, he has to retain lawyers, the family members are anxious. This is enough punishment. By the time he gets bail, the speaker can give him a call and tell him that, have you seen how strong I am? Don't repeat that. And if Borora is not strong-hearted, indeed you see him go quiet. Then thirdly, which is where you're partly going, the technical, of course, this is a defective charge sheet. It doesn't disclose the offense in the sense that it doesn't disclose the details of the offense. Because even up to now, we don't know which tweet is keeping him on remand. It is just that the political environment is so oppressive that the court seems timid to release the man because if I was the judicial officer, I wouldn't even release him on bail. I would give him an unconditional release, because once there is no valid charge before me, there is no court proceeding on the basis of which I'm even giving you bail. What is there is just illegal detention. We are talking about detention without trial. So what we are talking about is completely anathema in a constitutional democracy, even a pretentious one like ours. So it's a farce. It is harassment. It's called political persecution. It's called judicial harassment.
Marion, take us through what happens if the specificity of charges is not coming forth from the prosecution, and the judge, the chief magistrate, requires that a case be handled expeditiously. What is the redress on the part or especially for the victim or the person who faces jail time?
Well, if the offense is not specified, that case has to be dismissed, because then what are you charging someone on? Unfortunately, it should have been dismissed immediately, because I don't even think it's such that you can't even amend that charge sheet. But like Council has said, unfortunately, we are operating, and the judiciary is not immune to the political system under which we are operating under. That they have to make it so difficult for you, and like he said, the punishment is in the time that you spend behind bars. They know that they have a frivolous, they have an nonsensical case, that they're not going anywhere with it. The judge also knows that. But unfortunately, if you look down who appoints our judges, the system does, you know. Our judges are in so many ways beholden to the powers that be, because after all, they are appointed by the state. So unfortunately, for him, he may end up, they may keep on remanding him, but he's unjustly behind bars. Such a charge sheet would warrant that case is dismissed.
Interesting there. Let me ask the question, and I'm sure within the corridors of the judiciary, some of you hear the whispers that pass around. If political repression can be achieved by employing the powers, including what the Speaker is maybe or is perceived to be using in ensuring that the likes of Herbert Anderson Brora see or stay behind bars for as long as they can, how does it endanger the discourse, especially on the political front, ahead of, for example, elections coming up? Could there be the possibility that people are laying ground for a smooth passage? This one is something that Aaron Kiza should be able to help us on. If any one politician can be seen to cause arrest, prosecution of an individual, then the powerful perhaps may begin to see it as the latest tool in their arsenal to be able to go forward in terms of their political campaigns and journeys.
I think it's just being used more. It's not that it's novel. Political repression is what we are talking about with Steranyas, with Kakwenza, with literally every...
We've seen it before.
Yes, we have seen it before. It's just that we have not seen it at this scale and scope, especially at the level of a leader of the House of Parliament. This has been in respect to the first family. But right now, Speaker of Parliament is saying that I am as big as the President. I can also abuse power that I have. And I can also flex my parliamentary muscles and force the police to do what other people above me have been doing. So as we come close to 2026, naturally this can only go a gear up. Why? Every time there are elections, more political people get problems. It is documented. But for this specific speaker, again, it's just that she's on a higher pedestal. You know, the higher the baboon climbs, the more it gets exposed. You cannot contest against her. Either you are detained, you could even die. It's just that now she's Speaker of Parliament, we are seeing it, but that's what she has been doing. It is her political career, it is her method of work, it's her modus operandi, despicable as it is. So when you get a corrupt person and you give them more money, they steal more, not less. If you get a rude, authoritarian, repressive person and you give them a bigger pedestal, what you're expanding is that character. So for me, 2026, if you are not an ordinary person, I don't advise you to try to contest against the Speaker of Parliament. If you still want to be alive, safe, and out of prison, please think of other things. Yes, and even if you're not very sure of your deep pockets or your networks, again, criticizing the speaker is something you want to avoid, because actually you can avoid it. You can criticize other people, the prime minister, the ministers and whatnot. You can just leave the speaker for people who can, because if you can see she can detain without a specific charge, the RCC, first of all, she caused him to be fired. She's that powerful. You can be fired. Parliamentary police can pick you at night. She can ride roughshod the courts to ensure that actually you are remanded even with defective charges. There is no.
You say, did she write to the president to fire Brora? What do you mean?
I don't know how they say it in English, but
you
what a coincidence.
Marion, can you help me? can you what's that in Luganda?
English, it's...
all right, loose translation in English.
The English is that the time have been, the time have made charges against me the same time I've been fired. What a coincidence that two things are happening at the same time.
So you're basing on that.
His problems start with his speech, critical speech against the
But the president has also come out to openly condemn those who are criticizing her. So it's not hard. It's not
that
hard
in the case you are in a doubt, the president is sometimes inflaming the hostility that she's spewing on her critics by seeming to encourage her, by saying that she's what she claimed she's Museveni's asset. We don't know the extent of what she was meaning and how an asset she is to him, but he also gives credence to such utterances from her when he says that people who are criticizing her corrupt practices in parliament and her gang, the gang around her with whom she's stealing parliamentary money, are unpatriotic. So instead of praising Agora Discourse, instead of praising all these other people who are criticizing corruption in parliament, because parliament, instead of being a hotbed of a discourse of ideas, it has become a den of thieves, and some people are holding the light to it, and the president is surprisingly saying those people who are holding the torch, parliamentary thuggery, are unpatriotic. So why would she get another brother? So any other RD, the message is very clear. If you are a city leader and you get into the way of the speaker, where you end up, Rosera. The address is very clear. So you don't want to dare.
Interesting there. Now, this particular debate is one that can be stretched across board. There is a case of Ronald Kibedi Cox, a blogger who is still in jail, battling charges of cyber harassment and insulting the modesty of a woman. Now, we are talking about the ability to use social media for anything and the laws in place right now. Does social media, the way you see and know it, require regulation at any one point? Let me begin with Marion.
Well, I think like any other thing, I think social media can be used for bad and good. I think when regulating it, you need to see whether the good outweighs the bad for any democracy that seeks to regulate social media. Where perhaps we differ with the legislators who passed this particular amendments or even the act itself is that one, when we're talking about, let me say, the use of electronics or the use of the computer, we're talking about the Computer Misuse Act. And what they're saying is the access to data and all that. We're saying, one, that some of these provisions, for example, unauthorized access, are in the Data Protection Act. So it is just like
already
a repetition.
Existing.
Yeah, it's already existing. The offenses are there and the remedies are there. That is one. Secondly, you are being quite vague on what you're regulating. You cannot say that you're going to make discussions an offense, discussions on Twitter or Facebook an offense just because you feel like the way someone phrased something was very unpleasant to you.
Unpleasant to you.
You get.
All right.
So you, even when you are regulating, we're not saying you should not regulate social media platforms, but when you're regulating it, can we stick to the tenets of a democratic society, even when we're regulating
Aaron Kiza, is there any possibility that you will side with the regulation of social media to allow for decency, for example, but also not to propagate moral degeneration?
I would be very slow to use the law as an instrument for engendering morality. That's not really the function of the law. If the church is not going to instill morals, if the family is not going to instill morals, if schools, like that's for other social societies. Parliament should never at one time sit to ensure that we are good, well-behaved in-law types of Ugandans. That's really not, that's not what we pay them for. But I wanted to emphasize also that the same rights people exercise offline, enjoy offline, are also present in the online rhythm. It's not that right stop when you switch on on social media. But last, I wanted to say that the social media is a function of technology, computers. It moves very fast. So it's not something you legislate upon in a drunken stupor like the parliament is trying to do. No, you have to consult widely, technical people, lawyers, ICT guys, but also most of it is done by regulating platforms, not what. So Facebook is better placed to regulate this kind of bad things than Anita Among, because the guys are technical and so on and so forth.
And they understand the modalities. Maria Lakel, your very last word.
What I would say is that I would encourage our government we are already having a shrinking civic space and not to push the citizens further than where they are right now, to continue to, to give opportunity to citizens to express themselves by, putting out the laws like the Computer Misuse Act, bringing them down, and allowing the people that elected these people as their leaders to continue trusting them. All
right. Maria Lakel Gaba, Communications and Advocacy Officer at the Freedom of Information Center. Many thanks for that last word. Many thanks to you too. Aaron Kiza, lawyer, as well as Marion Chirabo, a lawyer too. It's been a pleasure having you on The Spot this evening. Your submissions and perspectives have emboldened our understanding of matters, but also cause reflection, especially on the part of anyone out there who is using social media to, of course, take into account that maybe sometimes your tone and the sentiment that you do propagate could land you in trouble. Sometimes the law is the law, at least at the time that it is. We know that it's being contested, as Aaron Kiza said, but until that is achieved, there are specifics that you must not go against. I hope you do not find yourself on the other end. I'm Chris Higenyi. It's been a pleasure having your company on The Spot. Good evening.